Decoys fell on France on this day in 1944. It was the eve of D-Day, the largest amphibian invasion in human history. And to throw the Nazis off guard, dummy parachutists were strategically dropped in key areas. Codenamed Operation Bodyguard, the Allied forces wanted to fool Germany about their invasion location. The deception began months before with fake plans leaked to German double agents. The Allies had cracked the Nazis' Enigma code, so they knew the misinformation was believed. Along with the para-dummies, inflatable tanks were also used to deceive German forces. And thanks to good weather, the next day, the Nazis were caught off guard when 160,000 soldiers invaded. It was the beginning of the end for the Nazis. Within a year, World War II would end. It's a little like Revelation. The lion has won. The lamb has risen, and it's only a matter of time before the war is over. Welcome to Haven Today on this Thursday. I'm David Wolin, sharing the great story that's all about Jesus, and today we continue in our series, Letters from Jesus. Just imagine you were in a used bookstore, looking through classics, historic works from great authors. Maybe you see some last names on the spines like Dickens, Twain, or even Dante. But what if you saw one listing the author as Jesus Christ? Well, that would catch your attention, wouldn't it? Well, we've been working our way through the 7 churches of Asia Minor, which are found in Revelation, and that's exactly what we have. These are real letters written by the risen Christ to 7 real historic churches. He was assessing each of them and telling them what they needed to hear, both the good and the bad. Some were really struggling. Others had been largely faithful, even in the midst of great persecution, but they needed encouragement as well. And today we're going to be thinking about one of those churches, the one found in the coastal town of Smyrna.
That's the joy of going to these sites. You actually walk where early Christians walked. You actually breathe the air of their environment. And, the places where there were temples to the pagan gods, suddenly you feel the tension. And as we go through this series, I hope to bring people into walking through these sites, actual being there with early Christians.
Dr. Joe Stoll, he's been with us all week sharing about these 7 churches and how the words of Jesus shared with them are just as relevant today as they were in the first century. And Joe will be back with us in a moment, and I want to share with you now how you can get your copy of the unique project that he was just talking about. It's called The 7 Churches of Revelation. It's a video teaching mini-series that he recorded on location in the very places where these historic churches once gathered. You'll see the pagan statues and ancient pillars of the Roman culture they lived in, and that helps capture a better sense of the trials they were facing. But there's something better. You'll also see more deeply into the meaning and implications of these letters from Jesus, and that in turn will encourage you to strive in your own life to live for Jesus faithfully in the here and now. And I'm so excited to send you this special double DVD set, The 7 Churches of Revelation. This is our way of saying thank you for your gift when you call us at 865-HAVEN. Again, the phone number, 865-HAVEN, and I'll just thank you in advance for your generosity. Every gift now helps us reach our fiscal year-end goal coming on June 30th. You can also give online at haventoday.org. Again, the website, haventoday.org. This is Haven Today. I'm David Wolin. As you travel through the churches of Revelation, you find that they actually follow a roadmap of sorts. Yesterday we looked at Ephesus, which was a major port city. In fact, it was probably the port you would have used as a point of departure to sail to the island of Patmos, where John was incarcerated. From Ephesus, you would travel north about 35 miles, and the next major city you'd come to is Smyrna, also a harbor city. Our guest this week, Dr. Joe Stoll, was there at the actual site of that ancient city, and so we'll hear a clip now from Dr. Stoll as he shares more about Smyrna's history as he stands in the midst of its ruins.
We're standing amongst the ruins of ancient Smyrna, which, as you can see, is tucked right into the middle of the thriving Turkish city of Izmir. But Smyrna in its day was a thriving city as well. In fact, Smyrna was known as one of the finest seaports in the world. If you were to take a straight line west from Smyrna, it was the closest seaport to Europe. In fact, you'd end up right in Athens, the gateway to the rest of Europe. So Smyrna was an important city in its day. Smyrna was known for its beauty and its architecture and its gorgeous flowers and its almost tropical climate. But Smyrna was known for something else. Its citizens took pride in its history. In 600 BC, the Lydian king Attalus conquered Smyrna and actually devastated it, left it as a humble, tiny village. And then when Alexander the Great came through here, in a dream he had a vision to rebuild Smyrna and rebuilt it into one of the most spectacular cities of its day. So the folklore and all of its literature was filled with references to death and resurrection. That we are the city who once was dead and have now come to life. And it's that theme that Jesus Christ picks up on when he writes his letter to early Christians suffering in this city. This claim to fame that Smyrna was that city that once was dead but has been resurrected now to a far better life was underscored by their major commodity. Smyrna held the exclusive rights to the import and export of the valued, fragrant spice called myrrh. Actually, hence their name, Smyrna. Myrrh was not only valued for its fragrance, but it was valued for its use in burial procedures. In fact, they sold just countless amounts of myrrh to Egypt, where the embalming process was to preserve the body for its right to the afterlife, and myrrh was a very key ingredient. You know, I wonder if when the wise men came to celebrate the birth of Christ, that the frankincense and myrrh that they brought, I wonder if that came from Smyrna. And I think too of the death of Christ, where they wrapped him and anointed him with myrrh. That probably came from Smyrna as well. So no wonder Jesus camps on this theme, that early Christians who just may face death for him would be resurrected to a far better life.
This is Haven Today. I'm David Wolin, and that was Dr. Joe Stoll sharing some fascinating details about the church and the ancient city of Smyrna. Now, Joe is going to be back with us in a few moments, but first, let's hear the word of the Lord. And these are literally the words spoken by Jesus in Revelation chapter 2, beginning in verse 8. And to the angel of the church in Smyrna write, the words of the first and the last, who died and came to life. I know your tribulation and your poverty, but you are rich. And the slander of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Do not fear what you are about to suffer. Behold, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison, that you may be tested, and for 10 days you will have tribulation. Be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. The one who conquers will not be hurt by the second death. Those are the words of Jesus in Revelation chapter 2, speaking to the church in Smyrna. It was an ancient, affluent, beautiful city, but in this particular location, Christians had no part in that affluence. In fact, they were being persecuted, and the persecution was rapidly intensifying. The text gives us a clue as to how this was happening. It says it was the work of the devil. Already they had been reduced to poverty and were undergoing tribulation, but Jesus told them directly, I know this. I know your situation. And he's assuring them that they are wealthy toward God. So their experience of poverty would be brief and temporary, as would the trial they were about to undergo. And it would appear from the text that their time was short. Jesus had no warnings for this church, nothing he confronted. For the majority of the churches, Jesus did, but not Smyrna. Just encouragement to endure the persecution which would soon be coming to them, and that because of the slanderous influence of the Jews who had particular influence in that city. They were prospering. They may have feared Rome's persecution. Roman leaders often saw Christians as a sort of Jewish sect, and so the Jews, feeling exposed because of this, may have thought, what better way to protect ourselves than to slander the Christians and ensure the ire of Rome focuses on them, not us? And that appears to be what happened. Some believers would be imprisoned, and some of them would face death for their faith. But Jesus was so clear, do not fear. Instead, he says, be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. And now joining me once again on the program, Dr. Joe Stoll. So, Joe, we just heard the letter to Smyrna, and I can't help but notice the contrast between this church facing great persecution, and then there's that final church, the seventh one that Jesus addresses in Laodicea. Can you set these churches up for us and why they're such a contrast?
Well, the interesting thing is that Jesus says, the day is coming when you will be persecuted, when some of you will be killed for my name, but persevere. And as early Christians, they were in poverty. And he says, you think you're poor, but you're really rich because you have mine. And see, Jesus has such a totally different definition of wealth, right? In his terms, wealth is never in material things, but always in his presence, because only he can satisfy and fulfill, right?
That's right.
And so the church at Smyrna is called to persevere under horrible persecution and to find their richness in Jesus. Then you go to Laodicea, right? So they live in one of the most affluent towns in the Roman Empire. It's the head of the world banking system. They have a corner on a special linen cloth that is coveted in the marketplaces of the world. They have an eye salve that they get out of the minerals of their land, that if you have eye disease, you use this salve for healing. And people came from all over the world for this. So believe me, at their church, they had a lot of Bentleys and Porsches in the parking lot, right? People so affluent. But that affluence, they think they were rich, had marginalized Jesus. Remember the old hymn, I need thee, oh, I need thee, every hour I need thee. It wasn't in their hymn book, David. You know, they never sang I need thee because they thought they had everything they needed. And Jesus comes, who's been marginalized by their affluence, and calls them, and he says, you think you're rich, but you're really poor because only I can satisfy. And he ends with that very interesting, behold, I stand at the door and knock, which we often think is an invitation for salvation. Not against that, but I think basically these are believers who have basically shut him out, and he wants to come in and fellowship with them. And so you have in Smyrna, they are poor, but he says you are rich. You have in Laodicea, you're rich, but you're really poor because in your wealth you have marginalized me. And he calls them to open the door and the fellowship with him. So it's an interesting contrast to those two stories.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. And I know that Laodicea, I mean, all of these 7 letters are relevant to the church today. And there's applications in all kinds of different categories. But Laodicea often seems to be the one that in Western culture is sort of crying out to us and telling us, you know, wake up. Why do you think we identify so much with Laodicea?
Well, I think in Western culture, on a world scale, we're very affluent, aren't we? We really have, we think, quote unquote, all that we need in terms of material stuff. Which then neutralizes us from knowing how much we need Jesus. So I think there's a very relevance there. Laodicea was very affluent. We live in very affluent cultures as well. What I think is interesting, too, in the letter to Laodicea, how does Jesus feel about us marginalizing him because we think we have all that we need in our wealth? It is the strongest reproof.
Yes.
He says, you remind me of your water, which their water was full of minerals that tasted horrible. I mean, their water was disgusting. If you took a drink of their water, you'd spit it out. And he says, you know, you remind me of your water.
Yeah.
I would just spit you out of my mouth.
Yeah.
And so if we think that the affluence marginalizing Christ is, it's not all that big, and it is a huge issue for Jesus, because he wants to be at the center of our lives. He longs to be there. He longs for us to find our wealth in him, all the wonderful things he can bring to us. So of all 7 late letters, that was the one that had the most strong reproof. And that should catch our attention.
Yeah, it should. And I'll just give a little plug for the video series here too, because I was watching through each of these episodes and was so struck. I mean, I know these are actual places, and this is modern day Turkey. And the cities were not far flung all around the Roman world. They were kind of contexted in the same, general region. And at Patmos, he's just off the coast.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a short swim or anything. It's there's some distance, but he's not that far from Asia Minor, and these are nearby churches. And every one of these places you can go to, and some of them have these amazing ruins. And you were actually showing some of the ancient pipes that were used to pipe in the water, right? Because they didn't have a local water source there, unlike some of the other nearby churches, like Colossae, right? I think you mentioned they had spring runoff. Yeah.
Yeah. And Hierapolis had the hot water. That's what he said. I wish you were cold or hot, right? But you're like your water. And like you're saying, and on the video series, you'll see this.
Yes.
Their water pipes are all full of like these mineral deposits and, sulfur. And just think of how horrible that tastes, right?
Right. And their water was lukewarm, literally, but also figuratively.
Yeah. And that's the joy of going to these sites. You actually walk where early Christians walked. You actually breathe the air of their environment. And, the places where there were temples to the pagan gods, suddenly you feel the tension that early Christians were in. You see those water pipes, then all of a sudden you realize what that meant about the water being distasteful to Jesus. So anyway, and as we go through this series, I hope to bring people into walking through these sites, actual being there with early Christians.
Yeah, it's so impactful. And for every single one of these 7 churches, you go to the site and talk about the history that's there and the significance of it. Well, Dr. Joe Stoll, we have a lot more to talk about as we open up more of these 7 letters to the 7 churches in Revelation. But this was great today. Thanks for opening up God's Word with us and sharing.
Thanks, David. Always a pleasure to be with you.
This is Haven Today. I'm David Wolin, and what a blessing this week it's been diving into these letters from Jesus to the 7 churches of Asia Minor, which we find in Revelation chapters 2 and 3. Dr. Joel Stoll has been with us. He's been to all 7 locations and studied their history. He knows his Bible well, and he shares amazing, helpful insights about Revelation, which we've been enjoying in this program, but there's even more in the mini-series called The 7 Churches of Revelation. This is a 2 DVD set, 7 episodes, incredibly well done. It makes you feel like you're there. And the point of it all is it helps you to take courage and walk more closely with Jesus. This double DVD set, The 7 Churches of Revelation, is our thank you for your gift of support to Haven Ministries. So call us now at 865-HAVEN, 865-HAVEN, or go online to haventoday.org. haventoday.org. I'm David Wolin. Won't you come back again next time? We'll be keeping it all about Jesus. It's the great story here on Haven Today.